All right, welcome back to the third part of the second set of lectures on the nature of ethical judgments. Last time I introduced the idea of ethical relativism, which is a view that many people find attractive. They find it attractive either because they're relativists about truth in general, or because they believe that ethical relativism is an expression of toleration for other cultures, respect for their moral views. I want in this this part of the lecture to discuss some reasons why ethical relativism is not as attractive as it seems at first sight. For one thing, this argument from toleration of cultural diversity to ethical relativism is not as strong as it seems to be. Relativism about truth is difficult to justify, and then there's problems with cultural conservatism, cultural pluralism, and this the mixing up of principles and their application that we need to work through. All right. First, let's look at some weaknesses of the argument from the toleration of cultural diversity to ethical relativism. The first point is that toleration is not the same as uncritical acceptance. If you really tolerate somebody's views, then you respect their views, and the respect requires engagement with the views of others. And simply saying of somebody else's views, well, they're what he thinks, or they're true for him, is not to engage, right? Toleration requires respect. Respect requires a sort of tolerant engagement, not an all-out war, but at least a discussion, a discursive engagement with the views of others, which means that you set out to look for some agreement between cultures on what's right and wrong. It's also true that toleration is not universal. There are intolerant cultures. And is it okay for them not to be ethically relativist? I mean, an intolerant culture is by definition not an ethical relativist culture because it thinks that other cultures are all wrong. And what are we supposed to do about that? The argument also may violate this stricture about going from an is to an ought, crosses the is-ought gap without sufficient warrant. From the fact that it is the case that cultures have different morals, let's say that's true, does it follow that they ought to have these different morals? Does it follow, or at least does it follow that it's ethically permissible that they have these different moral systems? That is an example of going from an is to an ought, and further argument is required, as Hume pointed out. And finally, this toleration view can only go so far. There are some practices of some cultures that are just so ghastly that it seems like we really should not tolerate them. The common example is female genital mutilation in some cultures in Africa. Women's genitals are mutilated to make them faithful in marriage, I suppose. And this is just beyond the pale. And we cannot, most people would not take cultural relativism and ethical relativism that far. This notion about relativism about truth that may be a reason for ethical relativism is difficult to justify, because what about the principle that all truth is relative? Is that universally true, or is it only true relative to the speaker? If a speaker says that the principle that all truth is relative is universally true or true for everyone, then the speaker contradicts herself, because there is at least one truth, which is the principle that all truth is relative, that is not relative, right? So there's a contradiction involved in the speaker saying that the principle of relativism about truth is true for everyone. And if the speaker, however, says that the principle is only true for her, then she can't really expect anybody else to, she can't justify to anybody else. She can't have an argument. She can't engage with people about whether her position is true. So either way, relativism about the truth is not agreement seeking. There's a problem too of ethical relativism being culturally conservative, because if your ethical views are true or false relative to what your culture says they are, then how can you criticize your culture's views as being wrong? How can you say that your culture's ethical practices are wrong when it's your culture that determines whether they're right or wrong? If you see what I mean, people cannot criticize their own culture for that reason. However, the essence of ethics is to think critically about our accepted practices, about our ethics is connected to cultural practices. It's connected to mores, or the ethos of a culture. But the main thing is that it looks critically at that. It doesn't just accept it. And the ethical relativist framework doesn't make any provision for that. Nor does the ethical relativism make any provision for the fact that modern society is highly multicultural. So people have multiple cultural memberships in modern society. If ethics is relative to cultural membership and cultural membership is multiple, then there's no real answer to what ethical principles a person should follow. If a person who's Sikh but educated in England, a citizen of Hong Kong, married to a Thai, what culture is she going to pick as determining what's right or wrong for her? And finally, there's an issue with principles and application. Ethical relativism may seem more prevalent than it actually is. And when you actually get down to it, you may find that people agree on principles. They just disagree on the application. Here's an example. It's an apocryphal story about a tribe where children kill their parents before they become elderly. Apocryphal because it's probably not true, but it's a good example in philosophy. Why does this happen? Okay, it seems wrong, right? It seems wrong to us to kill your parents before they become elderly when they're still middle-aged. It seems wrong to them, to people in this other culture. It seems wrong for us to keep our old folks alive and help put them in old folks' homes or whatever and keep them alive. What's going on? Well, suppose that you actually find that the people in that culture believe that when people die, they will live forever, infinity, at the age at which they die. So now it suddenly changes things, right? Because maybe now you're doing your parents a favor by killing them, as soon as they've stopped looking after you, because you're young enough to enjoy their, well, we wouldn't call it retirement, but they're young enough to enjoy their afterlife. Whereas if we keep them in an old age home until they become very very elderly and frail, they're going to live forever like that. And that would be wrong. You see that now, both we and they believe in the principle of love and respect for parents. We look after our parents. It's just that because of their beliefs and our beliefs, the application of the principle of loving your parents is different. So you have to be careful by looking at wide forms of cultural diversity about moral principles. It may not imply ethical diversity at a deeper level. One thing, though, we have to be aware of with cultural diversity and these strong cultural ties of people's morality, is that some cultures may be so sort of strong, their members may be so conditioned by their culture that they're unable to reason outside the ethical beliefs of that culture. And since ought implies can, then moral accountability may be stymied here because people are just unable to see that there's something wrong with, say, female genital mutilation because they have been so strongly conditioned to think that it's the right thing to do. So it arguably, and I keep underlining may here because it is definitely arguably, it's not something that you can just take for granted, cultural membership may be an excusing condition for moral accountability. All right, here is a question. See if you can figure out what's the best answer here. It's not quite as obvious as it seems. You're looking for which is the best example of an ethical relativist judgment, and you're looking for the best example. Okay, so pause the video, look at these answers, commit yourself to one of them, and we'll resume when you're ready. Okay, welcome back. I assume you've committed yourself. I'll take you through what I think here is the correct answer. And I warn you, this is not quite as clear as it should be, as it might be, because it's a little bit tricky to see what's going on here. Okay, answer A. The firm's policy should be to ignore small payments that grease the wheels of commerce in target markets where petty bribery is culturally expected. Well, we've got both of the parts of ethical relativism here. There's an ethical judgment going on, and we've got a place where a particular practice is culturally expected. So A is a possibility. Okay, but again, you're always asked to look for the best example, so don't just jump on the first one that looks like it might be a good one. B, petty bribery is culturally acceptable and even expected in the target market. Well, look at this. Remember this word? Is. Okay, this is a fact about the target market's culture, that petty bribery is culturally expected. It's not a ought, right? It doesn't cross the is-ought barrier, and it's not even an ethical statement, it's a factual statement. So this is not the right answer, even though it talks about some of the same things that are the right answer. C, because petty bribery is widespread in the target market, the firm's policy should be to permit small payments that grease the wheels of commerce. Okay, well this is a possibility too, right? Because the petty bribery is widespread in the market, so it seems to be culturally acceptable. The firm's policy should be, so it's we've got the components here of an ethical relativist view. Okay, so let's leave C here for a second, and we're going to have to compare it with A and see which one is the better. In Part D, after long debate, the committee decided that the firm should not invest in the profitable but environmentally risky project. Well, this was, we saw earlier, a case of the agreement-seeking nature of morality. People are having an argument and they're deciding. Okay, now let's look at A and B. A says that the firm's policy should be, to ignore the payments, because B says because bribery is widespread in the target market, the firm's policy should be to permit small payments. Now, what's going on here in C is we've got an example of moving from is, petty bribery is widespread, to ought, or should, to what should be the case. Okay, now even though it is talking about something that's happening in a culture, the actual thing that's going on here is you've got an example of an argument from is to ought, and consequently C is not the best answer here. The best answer is A. A says that the firm's policy should be to ignore these payments in where the culture expects it. Okay, that's ethical relativism. All right, see you in the next